Is Trump fit to lead? Recently, information has come to light that COVID-19 was originally engineered and federally funded right here in the U.S. Made in the USA, as they say. And Dr. Fauci was one of the key players in the funding and engineering of the bioweapon. So why is Trump saying it all came from China and that Dr. Fauci is a good person? Meanwhile, pushing for vaccines. Is there a deep state plan to coax the U.S. and China into war? We examine these issues and more tonight. And I just want to preface by saying that I supported the election of Trump, and I've supported Trump up to this point, but I'm beginning to question Trump's honesty and whether he's deserving of my continued support. And as we go into this video a little bit further, I'll explain why. In my last video, we talked about a study published by Ralph Baric on November 9th, 2015 about gain-of-function research at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where they engineered a virus using the surface protein SHC014 coronavirus found in horseshoe bats in China. This particular virus, known as a hybrid virus, caused severe acute respiratory syndrome, also known as SARS, in both mice and humans. The results of the study were published in Nature Medicine. The worst part of this is the research was federally funded. In October 2013, the U.S. government put a stop to all federal funding for gain-of-function studies. However, Ralph Baric's study on SCH014 chimeric coronavirus began before the moratorium was announced, so the National Institutes of Health allowed it to proceed during a review process and eventually decided the work did not fall under the new restrictions, Baric told Nature Medicine. By the way, I'm going to leave links for that article in the description. And one other thing I want to mention before I continue is that my understanding of anything that's labeled gain of function is a sort of a sugar-coated term for bioweapon. So when they're talking about gain of function, they're talking about a bioweapon, something that could be used as a bioweapon. So according to that information, this study began before the moratorium began in October 2013, and we know the research ended up in the Wuhan lab where it was being developed in 2019. That tells us this COVID-19 bioweapon was being engineered for at least 6 years. Scientist Dr. Judy Mikovits said this COVID-19 bioweapon was created between several locations: the North Carolina labs, the Army Medical Command installation at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which, by the way, according to history, is where the U.S. biological weapons program was until 1969. Now they claim they focus on a biological defense program, which not only would be a failure in the face of this COVID-19 outbreak, but I believe Dr. Mikovits that the COVID-19 bioweapon at some point in time was developed by the Army Research Institute of Infectious Disease at Fort Detrick, Maryland. And she says it ended up in the Wuhan lab. And I have a theory I'm going to present tonight as well as some information about President Trump, because I'm beginning to see a pattern with Trump we'll talk about that doesn't look good. Based on this information and all the additional information I presented in my previous video about Dr. Fauci and the COVID-19 bioweapon being federally funded, as well as information about Bill Gates investing in a vaccine patented by Dr. Fauci that will include a nanochip to be used for a new global cryptocurrency system to control the world. And we hear about COVID-19 itself possibly containing nanotechnology used for mind control. I covered that in a previous video where I had a scientist as a guest on the show. So what I think happened is the COVID-19 bioweapon began at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where it received federal funding. This was a shadow government deep state project, which is why the funding continued after the moratorium in 2013. After COVID-19 reached a certain stage of development, they moved it to Fort Detrick, Maryland for further bioweapon development. The reason it ends up at the Wuhan lab was for them to test the nanotechnology in both the virus and the vaccine because Wuhan, China already had 5G and cryptocurrency. It all adds up from an overview perspective. We got reports that Dr. Fauci was funding the Wuhan lab. Dr. Fauci has repeatedly argued that we should keep everything shut down, allowing our economy to be destroyed. And Trump doesn't see that as a sign of him pushing the deep state agenda. So the question is, was the COVID-19 outbreak done on purpose by the deep state shadow government in both the U.S. and China because Trump was improving our economy and his popularity was growing while China's economy was doing the worst it's been in a long time? Certainly that's the way it appears, and we will talk about it more after we hear some of the things Trump has been saying recently.
Breaking news this morning on a story that we have been following. A professor at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland has been arrested over his alleged financial ties to China. This just days after the FBI sounded the alarm on China's attempts to steal coronavirus research. A professor at the University of Arkansas was arrested on similar charges last week. And then in January, Harvard's chemistry chief was charged with failing to disclose that he, too, was being paid by the Chinese Communist Party. 2 weeks ago, Senator Tom Cotton told us that the CCP was trying in many ways to steal medical data from the United States to try and come up with a vaccine for COVID-19 before the United States. My sit-down with President Trump included this. We discussed IP theft and the pandemic's impact on his relationship with China and President Xi Jinping. Secretary Pompeo said that he has strong evidence that it did come from the virology lab. We've been reporting this every Sunday, by the way, from early on. You also said that you saw evidence. Can you tell us anything about the intelligence?
No, but we have a lot of information, and it's not good. But you know the worst of all, whether it came from the lab or came from the bats or it all came from China, and they should have stopped it. They could have stopped it at that source. I call it the source. Right there.
They made a decision to allow it to escape its borders.
I don't know if they made the decision, but it got out of control. I think more likely it got out of control.
Senator Cotton said that they didn't want the Chinese economy to contract 20% and the rest of the world to contract 2%.
So we were beating them very badly before this. We were beating them between the tariffs and other things we were doing. And we were going up, and they were having a very bad year. They were having the worst year they've had in 56 years.
He had Hong Kong protesters on the street,
and they weren't well, and even beyond that. And we were really doing well. And that is a theory. But here's what I know for sure. They didn't allow this whole thing. They didn't allow people to go into China, but they did allow them to go out to the world, including the United States. That's why Europe is a mess. That's why, look at these countries. Russia's having a hard time. Everybody's having a hard time.
So will it get worse for those countries, do you think?
Yeah, it's for some of them. Some have just started the process. We're getting toward the end of the process.
You know, so they downplayed the disease. They downplayed the virus. At the same time, they're allowing international travel. 5 million people leaving Wuhan, going to Italy, going to the United States. Then they start cornering the market on protective equipment, even though China is already the largest producer of this stuff.
That's not the big thing. Look, the big thing is they should have never let this happen. So I make a great trade deal, and now I say, it just doesn't feel the same to me. The ink was barely dry, and the plague came over. And it doesn't feel the same to me.
Are they going to renege on it? They're not going to buy the $250 billion, are they?
They will buy $250 billion. They said somewhere I see they'd like to renegotiate the deal. We're not going to renegotiate. Look, I'm not happy about anything having to do with that particular subject right now.
Have you spoken to Xi Jinping?
I have a very good relationship, but right now, I don't want to speak to him. I don't want to speak to him.
Because, Senator Cotton was saying maybe we should be limiting the amount of visas that we give to students who want to study things like quantum computing.
There are many things.
And AI.
There are many things we could do. We could do things. We could cut off the whole relationship. Now, if you did, what would happen? You'd save $500 billion if you cut off the whole relationship. Look, at what point does it, and I said this for years, I said it with other countries also. China's not the only country ripping us off. At NATO, where we defend Europe for nothing, by the way, essentially nothing, I was able to get them to pay hundreds of billions of dollars more. My biggest fan in the world, Secretary Stoltenberg.
He has said that to me on the show, actually.
He's been there a long time. He said nobody's ever gotten, we were paying more and more, they were paying less. You have to see the chart of what they pay. So we are defending Europe, and then they're taking advantage of us on trade. It's all one way, and it was all turning, and it is all turning around.
And you pulled back the money.
But we've been proven to be right. Yeah, I pulled back the money.
You pulled back the money from the thrift fund. They wanted to put 10% of the thrift fund into MSCI index. That was Chinese companies.
Billions.
$50 billion.
Yeah, I pulled it back.
Will you go one step further and force that Chinese companies have to follow accounting rules if they want to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ?
We're looking at that very strongly, but on the thrift fund, it's run by the Obama appointments, right? And we said, you got to do this, and we're going to find out whether or not they're going to do it very soon. And if they're not, we're going to replace them very quickly. And we are looking at your second part of your question. We're looking at that.
Because Chinese companies like an Alibaba, any Chinese company, they're listed on the New York Stock Exchange. They don't have to report their earnings the way an American company does.
It's pretty amazing. But here's the problem with that. Look, I hate to say it, but let's say we do that, right? So what are they going to do? They're going to move their listing to London or someplace else.
So this is interesting. A Harvard University chemistry chairman was arrested and accused of receiving millions of dollars in Chinese funding. And a University of Arkansas professor, as well as a professor at Case Western Reserve University's School of Medicine, were also arrested on similar charges. But we don't hear them saying that Dr. Anthony Fauci was arrested. Dr. Fauci has been the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease since 1984. That's 36 years. Anthony Fauci is as corrupt as you can get, and he is the medical industry's deep state person. Trump just said it, quote, all came from China, unquote. Well, that's not true, which brings Trump's honesty and competency into question. And they're saying that China is trying to get information about COVID-19 from some of these people who have been arrested in the U.S., which is interesting because they're trying to pretend that this all came out of China. So then why would China be trying to get information about COVID-19 from the U.S.? And so I'm beginning to see a bigger agenda here. It could be that China either has a sort of deep state or shadow government similar to our own that colluded with our deep state shadow government, or our deep state shadow government orchestrated both the COVID-19 bioweapon research at the Wuhan lab and the outbreak from the Wuhan lab. Otherwise, why would China be paying Americans for information about COVID-19? The answer is because it originated in the U.S. Next, let's listen to Trump say that Dr. Fauci is, quote, a very good person, unquote.
You're going to have the third quarter. People are starting to get into that right now, but it's going to be a transition. That's a transition quarter. We're going to do well in the fourth quarter, and I think next year, with all of the stimulus, all of the things we've done, I think we're going to have one of the best economic years we've ever had.
Dr. Fauci is saying a different thing. He says he's worried about spikes turning into outbreaks. He said it seems like it could be too soon, and that the major message he wants to convey is that the danger is if we skip over the checkpoints and the guidelines to open America again, then we risk the danger of multiple outbreaks.
So Anthony is a good person, very good person. I've disagreed with him. When I closed the border to China, he disagreed with that, and then ultimately he agreed, and he said I saved hundreds of thousands of lives, which is what happened. Everybody disagreed when I did that. I think that we have to open our schools. Young people are very little affected by this. We have to get the schools open. We have to get our country open. We have to open our country. Now, we want to do it safely, but we also want to do it as quickly as possible. We can't keep going on like this. I mean, you're going to have you're having bedlam already in the streets. You can't do this. We have to get it open. I totally disagree with him on schools, and we will have. I call them embers. I call them spikes, and I notice he used the word spike. Well, you might have that, and we'll put it out.
And I also watched a recent video of a Trump speech at the White House where Trump is promoting the production of a vaccine that already exists, but they have to pretend they're developing it, and they're not going to tell people that it contains a nanochip. And Dr. Fauci was standing behind him like a handler. And that was kind of the impression I got. I don't know why, but I just kind of had the impression that he was standing there like he's Trump's handler. Trump and Birx recently told the Center for Disease Control to stop exaggerating the number of COVID-19 related deaths, questioning the true severity. But now Trump's two biggest statements are, it's all China's fault, let's cut all ties to China, and let's push vaccines. After 9/11, Trump said in a phone interview that he was familiar with the construction of high-rise buildings in New York City, and he basically explained how planes couldn't penetrate the steel beams and concrete columns, and alluded to explosives being used. And we learned that jet fuel burns at about the same temperature as diesel fuel, not nearly hot enough to melt the structural steel beams, and you can't burn concrete columns. That just doesn't work, doesn't happen. Then we found thermite in the dust. So after the Las Vegas shootings, I expected Trump to recognize that the official narrative was a lie and force further investigations, but he never did. Trump supported the official narrative. Of course, if the truth about the Las Vegas shootings was revealed, it would hurt Trump's Las Vegas businesses. So he had a financial interest in the cover-up at the expense of the American people and victims of the shootings. Let's listen just briefly to an interview by Tucker Carlson, Catherine Lombardo, and Doug Papa regarding the 1 October 2017 Las Vegas shootings.
You know basically nothing.
That's true.
Why?
I don't have any idea. It was one of the reasons why I started writing the stories right after the incident for the Baltimore Post-Examiner. I wrote 35 stories to date and tried to get some answers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And every time you called up the PIO, initially they're either very rude or they just say, they comment that it's an ongoing investigation and they can't talk. I had some specific things that really bothered me from the start. One is where was the 40-member SWAT team the night of the worst mass shooting in American history? And
let's start right there. What's the answer to that?
Nobody knows, and actually nobody actually asked the question to Sheriff Lombardo to this day. I was the only one that wrote these in the stories. I do not know where they were. I do know from doing my investigation and talking to sources within and outside the Metropolitan Police Department that Levi Hancock, who was the officer that breached the door with explosives, went in with an ad hoc team of 2 canine officers and I believe that Donaldson was the gang unit detective, and he was a little concerned about his safety from what I was told because he was going in with people he never worked with before. His SWAT team members weren't anywhere in sight. That's one of the things I raised, one of the issues I raised in the story. I do not know.
And that's, you can add that to a long list of things we don't know. So I think a basic question I've had from the beginning, and I haven't heard it addressed, is did Stephen Paddock come to the attention of authorities, federal, state, or local, before this shooting? And I'm not alleging a conspiracy, but it's a basic question. Did they know who this guy was? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer, but I suspect the answer is yes, based on what I've heard. Listen, I can't remember what's rumor, what's conspiracy theory, and what's facts on some days, but I've heard a lot of things. I've actually received a lot of information on paper. Yeah, I think they knew who he was. Of course they knew who he was.
So answer that even more basic question. You're handling the legal end of this. Where's the information coming from? The FBI have apparently taken over the bulk of the investigation. Is there a central source for known facts about what happened, or is it just ad hoc?
There is no source right now at all for any information as to what happened. Like I've said from the beginning, we expect it to take 4 to 6 months for the investigation. Look, I've said from the beginning that the lawyers for MGM and the corporate executives have been hunkered down in a room from day one, moment one, and they are putting all of their resources to protection of themselves, defending themselves.
That's it right there. Look, I don't know the answer to any of these questions, but I know lying when I see it. I can smell it, and there's a lot of it around this story. I suspect that, I'm not alleging a cover-up. I don't think it's as simple as that, but that the authorities are trying to cloak their incompetence from the public. Do you have evidence that that's true?
Well, one of the things I picked up on the stories, I did a story on, was that I was told through sources inside and outside the police department, and I verified it, was that the homicide division early on was pulled off this case. Now, homicide detectives normally investigate homicides and suicides because you don't know if a suicide is actually a homicide until it's investigated.
Right.
They were pulled off the case, and the case was given to an entirely different bureau commander. It answers to something to the public accountability section. Now, the captain of that force investigation team that's investigating the Paddock shooting, and I was told this by the homicide unit of the LVMPD, the captain who oversees that bureau is Captain Kelly McMahill, who's the wife of the number 2 guy running the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, Under Sheriff Kevin McMahill. Seems a little bit bizarre to me. When I try to get some answers from Metro Police to find out why the homicide division was pulled off and it was given to the force investigating team, and you got to understand something, the force investigation team for Metro investigates officer-involved shootings and police officer use of force. I could not get any answer.
Right. Well, that's the story of this whole thing. So let me ask you just a couple of really simple questions that I've been wondering about. From the very beginning, we heard about bump stocks. That was kind of the signature piece of hardware from this atrocity, the bump stock. And yet the photographs of the rifles in the room that were publicly disseminated had bipods on them. And anyone who's ever operated a bump stock or understands how it works can tell you can't operate a rifle with a bump stock if it's got a bipod because it doesn't move back and forth in the way that it needs to. Are they still saying that bump stocks were used in this? Is that still a claim?
They haven't told us, but what we suspect is that he had a complete and total arsenal upstairs in his room.
But for what purposes? And why would he have 2 shooting positions when only one? Just looking at it, it seems like the angles was not necessary to have 2. Any insight on that?
Based on what we've heard, it was fully planned out by him. He was up there for, we think, 6 days. Now, you know that the first few days he was there, he was, I think, registered under his girlfriend's name. So he was actually there for 5 or 6 days planning this. We don't think he left the room once.
Were housekeepers ever in the room?
We don't think housekeepers were allowed in the room either. He had the do not disturb sign. So once MGM, Mandalay Bay, gives us the answers that I've requested, that we've requested through our subpoena process, through the civil investigation pursuant to the lawsuit. Listen, I just received a piece of information last week. I received the special event permit from the city. And there it is in black and white, handwritten, filled out by an MGM executive for this event that happened right behind us. It wasn't Live Nation Entertainment. It was MGM, a corporate executive, who filled out the special event permit for this particular concert. So their fingerprints are all over it.
So why would the interior door be locked? Police said they broke through, A, and B, how in the world could an officer have fired a weapon accidentally in the room after the shooting? Is there any explanation for how that might have happened?
No. Again, I raised both those issues in my story. As far as for the door being locked, because they did breach the outer door when they went in.
Yes.
You heard that on the radio. And then when you went in after they cleared the first room, you hear them on the radio saying we have to breach the second door in 5 seconds. Now, if you're breaching the door, obviously they couldn't get in, so it was locked. And my question has always been, well, who locked that door? According to Sheriff Lombardo, Paddock committed suicide right after he fired his last round, somewhere in that time period. So who locked that door from the inside? Because it had to be locked from the inside.
It's one of many questions,
No
and
answers
I
yet.
suspect we should be here all week into next month to get answers.
Great.
But we're going to continue following the story. Thank you both very much.
Thank you for covering this. My
I
clients
appreciate it.
too.
We mean it.
Thank you.
Doug Papa raised a lot of key points. Where was the 40-man SWAT team? Why was the homicide unit removed from the case and the force investigation team took over? The force investigation team investigates officer-involved shootings, so who did officers shoot? And if Paddock killed himself, who locked the 134 adjoining door from the other side? If it was just one shooter, why 2 rooms with 2 broken windows and so many weapons? And if bump stocks were used, why did guns have bipods? You don't use bump stocks with bipods. So 134 and 135 are obviously a staged crime scene. Catherine Lombardo explained how the only thing the MGM cared about was protecting themselves from liability, and she exposed that the MGM helped plan the concert and signed the permit. So that concert was actually a Mandalay Bay MGM concert. A lot of people don't know that. That was very good research by Catherine Lombardo. I covered a lot of the answers to these questions in other videos. We found out the MGM allowed guns to be stockpiled at the Mandalay Bay, and they told security who were aware of it to allow it. And we know that it was all part of a FEMA gun control scam to get bump stocks banned and to target conservative Trump supporters who defend the Second Amendment. Mary Lou Danley was working for the FBI, according to a basic background check, and 30 or so FBI personnel checked into the Mandalay Bay just prior to the shootings. Through its participation, the MGM received the FEMA drill federal funding and foreknowledge for illegal insider trading. And bump stocks were banned. They ended up getting banned. Trump turned a blind eye, just like he's turning a blind eye now, regarding deep state involvement in the engineering and release of the COVID-19 bioweapon. Yes, they're investigating the Flynn unmasking, but that's not enough. If it doesn't affect Trump or his business or members of his, his administration, he doesn't care. So the question arises, is Trump fit to lead?